Billy Graham, pastor, preacher, evangelist, and minister. He's listened to by ordinary people, by politicians, and by presidents. He preached to millions of believers in over 183 countries, known for his eloquent and inspiring sermons, which were broadcasted on radio and television to over 210 million viewers during his 58-year career. He helped to shape the worldview of millions by providing evidence for the biblical opposition towards segregation, communism, and postmodernism throughout his lifetime. He earned the respect and admiration of Bible-believing people from all cultures, ethnicities, and languages. Without a determined leader like Billy Graham, the evangelical movement as a whole would have struggled to overcome its segregationist attitudes and defend the faith against the threats of communism and postmodern humanist ideologies. Graham's opposition to segregation was so intense that he threatened to leave a revival if the organizers replaced the barriers that he had publicly torn down, separating the crowd by race. Graham's persistence became more apparent when he allowed African American ministers to become members of the executive committee overseeing his New York crusade. Graham also invited the prominent black minister Martin Luther King to join him during his New York City revival, which lasted 16 weeks and attracted over 2.3 million audience members. The two preachers had met and become close friends during the Montgomery bus boycotts in 1955, of which King was a prominent leader. However, Graham and King did have their share of conflict. Graham had invited the Texas governor, Price Daniel, who was a well-known segregationist, to introduce him during a crusade in San Antonio. King publicly declared that if Graham allowed Daniel to introduce him, he would be endorsing racism and discrimination. However, Graham was not affected by this response, but would later regret the decision and had taken an extremely strong stance against racism and segregation. Graham is also rumored to have bailed King out of jail after he had been arrested during the Albany movement. Following King's assassination in 1968, Graham noted that the United States had lost a great social leader and prophet. Graham's faith and biblical knowledge was of great help when he made the argument for racial integration to a member of the KKK, noting that there was absolutely no scriptural basis for segregation. Graham was strongly opposed to any form of unnecessary international political intervention, but supported all actions taken by the United States in the fight against communism in the 1970s and 80s. He is known to have stated that pastors and ministers should never go out of their way to be involved in or preach about political topics. However, they have a responsibility to speak on imminent, current, cultural, and social issues, such as communism. Graham urged President Truman to take action against the communist threat in North Korea. Truman, however, disliked Graham and stated that the pastor was one of those counterfeit evangelists and claimed he was only interested in getting his name in the paper. Later, Graham would support Richard Nixon during his presidential campaign, with whom he would become good friends. Graham would continue to maintain aggressive support of Nixon's views of foreign policy towards the threat of communism. Billy Graham also served as somewhat of an apologist among his many pastoral capacities, providing evidence to refute the arguments made by unbelievers, debunking myths, answering questions, and exposing lies and deceitful concepts. One of the most pressing issues during the height of Graham's career was increasing support for legalization of abortion. Graham opposed abortion for all reasons, stating that to disregard the sanctity of the unborn is to ignore all scientific evidence which points to conception as the beginning of life. Graham also stated that he held science in high regard and that science and faith were not mutually exclusive and could be objectively compatible. Graham also stated that the Bible is not a book of science, and he believes the creation story. Whether or not man developed through the evolutionary process makes no difference as to what mankind is. Graham started a newspaper column called My Answers, in which he responded to questions of faith intertwined with science. In response to a question submitted by a high school student, Graham replied that science and religion were not hostile or opposed to each other, only if they are properly understood. He stated that science, while it does provide an understanding of the physical world, will never be able to answer life's most important questions. Billy Graham was an invaluable asset to the evangelical movement, which strove to accurately represent the Bible on social, political, and ideological issues. Graham was fundamental in all but eradicating the not outwardly racist but separatist attitudes held by the evangelical movement. At the time, these attitudes represented a phenomenon that was pervasive and generally accepted in almost every aspect of society until the rise of the civil rights movement. He defended the gospel against those who claimed that Jesus and his teachings promoted and encouraged socialism and communist practices. He strove to dispel the presumed incompatibility between science and religion through apologetical and philosophical argumentation. Without Graham, the evangelical movement would have struggled to overcome societal racism, defend the faith against the evils of socialism, and maintain an understanding of the compatibility between secular science and Christianity.